So let's deal with this. Let's get some understanding on why I'm not African and why I'm not African American and why I don't identify as either of those terms. And to do that, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go straight into the dictionary and we're going to define the term that we're talking about so we can be on the same page as we go through this video.
African, a native or inhabitant of Africa.
You see, so it says a native or an inhabitant of Africa. Let's deal with the first part, a native. If someone is a native, that means that they're native or born in that land. So in this instance, it would be born in the land or on the continent of Africa. And for me, I was born on Camp Pendleton, which is a United States Marine Corps base in California. And so automatically, I don't check that box. Now let's deal with the other aspect of it. Or inhabitant of Africa. An inhabitant is somebody who lives on the continent of Africa. Now, I don't live on the continent of Africa. I live in the United States. And in fact, I've never stepped foot on the continent of Africa in my life. Although I do plan on going there. But I've never been there. So I'm not a native. I was never born there, and I'm not an inhabitant of Africa. So on this portion of the definition, I don't check any of the boxes to sit here and say that I'm African. And so let's deal with the other part of this definition. And let's see what this has to say.
A person, and especially a black person of African ancestry.
So it's distinguishing. So it's saying two things. It's saying a person and especially a black person. So it's distinguishing between two types of people. A person and especially, more specifically, a black person of African ancestry. And now we have to understand, what are they referring to when they're talking about a black person? What are they indicating here when they're placing this language in here, saying a black person? I would assume, okay, let's assume I don't know what a black person is. What is a black person? So now I need to find out, because it's the black is taking the place of an adjective, and it's describing the noun. The noun is person. So I need to find out, what is it referring to when it's saying black. Now we're going to go into the dictionary and look up what black is, and so we can relate it to what it's referring to in this context. What does it mean, a black person?
Black, thoroughly sinister or evil, wicked, very sad, gloomy, or calamitous, characterized by hostility or angry discontent, sullen, distorted or darkened by anger, connected with or invoking the supernatural and especially the devil.
Here we go. So now this is when the stuff starts to get spicy. When we start looking up what black is and what it means, and then we start to find out the words that are associated with this term black. And we see that it's associated with being thoroughly sinister or evil, wicked, connected with the devil, sad, gloomy, and angry. All these words are connected to the word black. And so I have to sit back and ask myself, why would I associate myself with the word black if I know that these are all the meanings that are associated with that word? Why would I take on that meaning? And further, why would somebody else want to even name themselves that if it's related to these other words?
It was in the development of this infamous, iniquitous, and inhuman slave traffic that the term Negro was foisted as a noun, as a designation, as a name, upon those who were unfortunate enough to be caught in the clutches of the slave traders. This is the origin of the term Negro.
So Negro is just a Spanish term for the word black. They both mean the same exact thing. So what we come to find out is that it's not the people who call themselves black who are the ones who name themselves that. But instead, it was slave catchers who ended up placing this brand on people intended to be slaves. It gets super spicy when we start to dig into the information. And so as a free person, I don't associate myself with slave names, right? Black people were invented specifically by the European colonists for a specific purpose, to serve their needs as slaves. Nothing more and nothing less. And not just any type of slave. This is what you have to understand. Not just any type of slave. A perpetual slave. What is a perpetual slave? That means once they created the blacks, once those people started to have children, they would create the reality that those blacks had accepted, which is being inferior, being ugly, being subhuman. All those types of characteristics, traits, and that worldview would then, they would take and they would pass that on to their children. The children would take that same worldview and that same brand of being black, and then when they had children, they would take that and they would pass it on to their children, and it would keep going on and on and on, all the way up until today, where you have the descendants of those people still hanging on to that name. Why? Because they don't have any other idea that there's another way that you can be other than being a slave. That's what it means by a perpetual slave, an everlasting slave, a never-ending slave. And so some people will hold on to this identity of being black all the way into the death. They hold on to it like a trophy, right? Because that's all they know. And so one of the most satisfying feelings that a person could feel is detaching themselves from the identity of black. Lifting that weight off of your shoulders and stepping into the world of being a free person. And this is something that every black person who has the desire to be free, because not all black people have a desire to be free, but the ones that do have a desire to be free, that's something that each and every one of you are going to have to end up doing. There's no way out of it. You can't walk into the free world with a slave name. You cannot understand yourself to be a free person and believe it with having a slave name. It just doesn't work that way. And so now I've dealt with the term African. Let's move on to this term African American, and let's see if we can get some understanding with this.
African American, a black American of African descent.
Uh-oh, here we go again. Keep tying this black thing in together with these definitions. And so we can see that African American in one aspect is come to mean and come to be synonymous with black or black American. And we already went over black and how black means wicked, evil, sad, gloomy, calamitous, and someone connected with the devil. We already know that a free person cannot associate themselves with that name. Therefore, I remove myself from the conversation. And other people can have that conversation and they can argue back and forth amongst themselves about why they should be called black and African American, all those types of things, why you should have those titles. But a free person removes themselves from that conversation and lets everyone in the pit do what everyone in the pit does, right? So I don't speak the African language. We don't eat the same food, don't listen to the same music. I don't know what it's like to breathe the African air. I don't know what it's like to stick my feet in the African soil. I don't know what it's like to walk the African streets, drive through the African traffic, right? I don't know about any of those things, right? I've never been to Africa, right? Although I'm sure it's a beautiful place, and one day I do plan on going there, like I said, to see it. But all these things go into the identity of being African. And me saying and identifying as African is like somebody who left the United States 400 years ago, moved to Africa, had children. 400 years later to today, their children grow up, and when the children grow up, they're calling themselves American. American Africans. We have to think about that. And then to people who are in America, we would look at that and say, you know, you're not American. You know, African accent and everything, talking about they're American, right? It would look like they're delusional. And so it is if I go over to Africa talking about I'm African, most of the people there are going to look at me like he's lost his mind. You're not African. Right? You're American. He's lost his mind, and rightfully so. Right? You can't blame him. They would be right. He must have lost his mind. And that's exactly what has happened to the folks who were taken in slavery branded black, created as a perpetual slave, and then let loose without some type of psychological treatment to correct the reality that they inherited. They lost their mind. Right? But there's a way to pick it back up. One of the first things you have to do is release that term black. That's one of the ways to pick it up. And developing the mind of someone who has lost it. Because you got to remove those terms. You're affirming these things. I am black. What are you affirming? I am black? What is that affirming? What are you telling yourself that all the time? You got to think about this. Right? We already saw what it says. What black is synonymous with. Evil, wicked, sad, calamitous, gloomy, unlucky. I mean, they unleashed the whole slew of attacks when they created the perpetual slave called a black person. They unleashed it all. They slapped and loaded everything into that term. Unfriendly. I mean, you should see the synonyms that are also attached with it as well. Aggressive, all types of things that they put in there. Angry. Those are all synonyms. Right? And so that's some of the steps that have to be taken in order to walk into the world of freedom. And so when I think about an actual person or people who could qualify themselves as African American, if that would be the proper term, it would be somebody like Elon Musk or a Trevor Noah, which are two people that are actually born on the continent of Africa, raised in Africa. They know what it's like to step on African land, live in the African cities, breathe the African air, right? They moved over to America and became American citizens, thus making them African American, if that's how they choose to identify. Real African Americans, right? And so as far as the topic is concerned, those are the reasons why I don't identify with African or African American, right? Born here in America, raised here in America, dream here in America. And so I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody else, and especially by taking on a name of another culture that I don't have any understanding of.